and I'm going to bring Sarah. Hey, Sarah, how's it going? You are muted.
There we go. It's
You are no
going well,
longer
Javi. How you
muted.
doing?
Good. How you doing?
Doing good. I'm excited to be here today. Thanks for having me.
That, thank you for coming. And like I was going to say, it's like you're talking about Cosmos DB and Gremlin.net
Yes,
today.
yes. Yeah, so we're going to be talking not your standard relational database stuff, but navigating into the relationships within the data.
That's awesome. And it's great because right now, the one thing I forgot to mention with when the EFT members starting that we're in the data block, right? So one of the things we've done with this conference is like, hey, what are these sessions that we have? Let's put them into common themes. And right now we're talking all about data until at least 11 a.m. Pacific, right? So your session and the following session will be all data. So this is really, really great. So if you want to know more about it, please tune in. Remember, we still have the swag back going, and we still have the Decoder Challenge. So please go and fill those out. Without further ado, Sarah, please take it away. I'm going to bring on your slide here. I'm going to mute my
Excellent.
video. And hold on. Oh, mouse is acting up. All right. I'm going to stop my video and stop my audio. Take it away.
All righty. Thanks again, Javi. So we have a very short period of time, so I'm not going to be getting too carried away, but I want to talk to you today about navigating graphs in Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin using gremlin.net. So some things to note. First of all, graph databases. A lot of the people I work with and talk with, a lot of people who follow me on the social medias, they're all about relational data. So graph data, just so you know, it's a little bit different. Instead of looking at things with relationships between tables, you're now getting into the data and looking at the relationships within the data. We're looking at things you'll hear like recommendation engines, fraud detection engines, social networking, how are things connected, understanding your lay of the land. Other examples are some people have used it for doing IT networking and data management and understanding who owns what. So graph data is, again, all about the relationships. Now, Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin, what is this? So Azure Cosmos DB itself is a multi-model database. So think of it as it used to be just NoSQL, but it's not anymore. So they have APIs for graph data, document data, wide column stores, horizontal scaling relational data, and key value pairs. The Apache Gremlin part is what we will be looking at here in this session. And this is talking about the graph database implementation using Apache Gremlin syntax. Now, for sake of time, the ability to partition graphs, which is meant for horizontal scaling for larger graphs. I'm not going to get into those details. I want to show how you work with Gremlin syntax using gremlin.net. You can run these queries, the Gremlin queries, within Azure Data Explorer in the Azure portal. You can add items to your graph within the Azure Data Explorer as well. But again, today's focus, C#, gremlin.net. What are we going to take a look at with that? But before we get into the code, I want to establish some key concepts. First, there's the vertexes. Think of this as the things or the nodes. You may hear me say vertexes or vertices, both are correct, but this is the things that we're looking at to see the relationships between them. Now, in this slide, you're going to see that there are different colors. So we have different types of nodes. So we have the red circles. Those are talks. That's the type that they are, or the label, as we will see here in a little bit. Data, this is a topic. .NET Conf, that's this event. And if you saw the promo video I made for this, look, you are here in my talk. Told you, you are in my talk. I need you to be here. All right. So those are the vertexes. Next, the edges. So these are the relationships. These are the arrows. The direction matters for Azure Cosmos DB. Some graph engines, the direction doesn't matter, but for what we're looking at today, the direction does matter. With the edges, think of them as relationships. Now, looking at this picture by itself, you're probably like, well, this doesn't make sense. U to data, .NET to data, data to these. What kind of relationships are we looking at here? So with those relationships, what we're looking at, well, before we get into what those are, let's take a look at the whole collection. So vertexes plus edges, that makes them the graph. That's this entire collection. And the label, that's this interested in and contains, and the .NET Conf covers data. Those are called labels. Now, when we use this in the Azure Data Explorer in the Azure portal, you will not see the labels. You'll see, and I'll show you a graph rendition from the portal here in a little bit, but you will see the vertexes and you will see arrows drawn. Their labels are stored in properties. And just like with the vertices, you do not see those labels. Those are also stored on the properties. And you can see them in the results, which is what we will look at. Okay. All right. But knowing Azure Cosmos DB and their Gremlin support, things you need to know. So right now, it's just Graphson v2 that is supported and not v3. So if you look at gremlin.net documentation, you may see a lot of references to Graphson v3. We cannot use it with Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin, so that is taken out. When it comes to the documentation for using Graphson v2 with Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin, they recommend passing the traversal as a string. So I will show you what the strings look like to a point, but when I was writing this code a long time ago, I saw the string and I would always cringe like, oh, it's like SQL strings and SQL injection attacks. You don't want to do that. Thankfully, we'll be using gremlin.net.extensions, which allows us to use parameterized queries. So we can lessen those injection fears a little bit. With gremlin.net and Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin, we have to use the 3.4.x line. So today we'll use 3.4.13. Gremlin.net 3.5 and 3.6 have compatibility issues, so just be aware of that. There is a link. So these slides, rest assured, are going to be made available in a GitHub repo. That link is coming up real shortly, as in like the next slide. But all of these links are in the slide. I will be sharing these links afterwards as well. The other thing to note is that it's only primitive types for properties. You don't want to use complex objects for properties when working with Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin. Okay, let's look at the demo. Like I said, I know we are short with time. This talk I have done for 60 minutes and 90 minutes, so we're going to try to keep it short. Let's see. So the demo that I'm going to show you, I have made available in GitHub. This QR code will take you to the GitHub. The repo includes a console app, a .NET MAUI app, and the class library. What I'm going to show you, I will show you the code today for the .NET MAUI app and class library. We are working with gremlin.net 3.4.13, gremlin.net extension 0.3.0. If you want to go to the repo itself, again, you can scan the QR code or go to github.com/saduki/.net-conf-2022-gremlin-net-demo. All of the code that I'm going to show you is available there. And if you want to play with the console app, or if you want to use the console app on Linux, for example, you can. I am using .NET 7 for all of these applications. Okay, let's go into the demo. So first, I'm going to bring the MAUI app. All right, so this is my MAUI application. It's got all sorts of things going on here. So we want to talk about vertexes and edges and a graph. I'm going to toggle my graph, which is down below. You'll know my scroll bar has shrunk or grown. This is the graph that we're talking about. So as I mentioned, you are in this talk. While you like this talk, you may also like some other data talks. So we're going to take a very simplified approach on a recommendation engine. We're not going to get too carried away in going through the details of, okay, now my friends are interested in this and I might be interested in that. I will take care of that in another blog post that's coming up. But you are interested in data. .NET Conf covers data. We saw these on the vertexes slide. And then you'll see that data has talks, and these are the 3 talks. We will be talking about these for each of the different examples. I'm going to go ahead and toggle the graph so it's closed again. All right. Now, this app, I have different buttons to go to the different queries for Gremlin. You're going to see the parameterized queries on the left, and then the response that we get on the right. With Azure Cosmos DB, we're making the calls in Graphs on V2. The response will come back as JSON. I'm going to show JSON responses. I'm not going to show them mapping to types. That's something we have plenty of documentation for out there on learn.microsoft.com. All right, so let's say I want to get all the vertices. I want to get all the things. So when I get a graph database, the things I want to know about are, what are my vertices? What are my edges? About how many am I working with? So when I click my get vertex count, you'll see here that the query is g.v.count. So let's talk about this query. G, think of that, G is for graph. This is the graph traversal. You start with, I need a collection of vertices and edges. Next, I have V. So give me just the vertices, and then .count. How many are there? I want to go ahead and tell it to execute the query. When I tell it execute query, you'll see that there's 103. Now with 103 results, that's what we're working with, edges or vertexes. Edges, we can do the same kind of deal. Edges are the relationships, so you can see how many relationships we have. We have 102. Now, what does this look like when we're getting some vertex in particular? Let's say that we want to get you. You're in my talk, so you're going to be in my demos as well. So I'm going to run a query, g.v. I can get all the vertices with a certain property value by using has. Now, g.v.has, the property name, and then the property value. Because we're using parameterized queries, you're going to see variable names for property values, but the parameter values are showing in the parameters section. So g.v.has ID of you, and I have a button down here, execute query. And notice we come back, this is coming back as JSON. There's the fields ID, the label is the person, the type, so this tells you I'm working with a vertex. You can see then any additional properties. So I have a name. Don't worry about these IDs under the covers unless you find a need to consume them in your application. Those are assigned automatically by Azure Cosmos DB, but the values are there. Now you're going to see this PK and value PK. This is because I'm using a flat graph. I'm not using a partitioned graph. So we're trying to keep it as simple as we can for queries. If you're working with a partition graph, that means that your data is stored across multiple partitions, and your queries will have to be optimized so that you're not querying against multiple partitions as much. Because when you're querying against multiple partitions, that's more expensive. Okay, so g.v, v vertex things, g.e edges. This is a pipelining language, and so think of it, it's going to read it from left to right and execute from left to right. Now what you're seeing here, this is going to be the Gremlin rendition of it. But let me show you the gremlin.net and gremlin.net extensions and what we have to do for that. So I'm going to switch over to my code here. This is going to be the class library. Now I'm going to close my Solution Explorer at the moment and minimize that. So this is what you're seeing here. This is C#. And this is my class library project that's in my GitHub repo. And so what you're going to see, the first thing we have to declare at the top of the class is our traversal source. This is the G. You're going to notice that the syntax here looks similar to what we're showing in the MAUI application for the syntax. The only difference is that we're using C# syntax here. So G.capital V is still the same, but notice now .has is capital H, and has label is capital H. And so you're going to see a lot of capitals, where in the Gremlin syntax that you see in MAUI, it'll show lowercase. Is it case sensitive? It will run it, you'll run it into case sensitivity issues depending on how it's set up. So this is what gremlin.net allows us to do. So gremlin.net allows us to write our Gremlin queries. Now this .to Gremlin query is what's allowing us to parameterize the query. And this is what's allowing us to then write our queries in a Gremlin syntax without having to pass the strings as just plain strings. So just so you're aware of what the gremlin.net part looks like, this is my class library. Now, why did I go with the class library? It's because I have two different demos in the repo. I have a console demo that you can run on any of the platforms. I have a .NET MAUI one because I wanted to show .NET MAUI. People are talking about .NET MAUI. I wanted to see what it was all about. And so that's how I got into the .NET MAUI stuff. Okay. Now you'll see that there are various other queries in here. Both the MAUI and the console app will refer back to those. So you can understand where we're at. I'm going to bring the MAUI app back up. So we are using gremlin.net under the covers. Oh, I guess one other thing to show with that. Jeff Fritz says, don't feed gremlin.net after midnight. No, don't feed the gremlins after midnight. No good comes from that. I should show that there are no more tricks up my sleeve. So I have a query executor class. And I'm going to scroll all the way to the top. You might be wondering, how am I connecting to Azure Cosmos DB in the code? Well, I'm using environment variables in this case. Why environment variables? That way I can check it into GitHub and you all can do the same without having to worry about exposing your credentials. I would use the default Azure credential or the chain token credential, but that doesn't work for the database level, for the data level. So I have a host, I have a primary key, I have a database, I have a container. This primary key, that's also the term for the password. So I store those in my environment variables. And so that's how this particular data layer is looking. It's looking for the environment variables. You can refactor the code for your needs and make it more organized and more like dependency injection friendly, things like that. But this is just for the demo how I chose to take the approach. I do have some singular queries, some multiple queries, but the next thing I want to show is when it comes to the presentation and connecting in Azure Cosmos DB, the username is not your name. It is not your account name. It is /db/ your database name /calls/ and then your container or collection name. Trying to find that documentation was a challenge, so just be aware that it is not a name. It is your username, but this is how the formatting is. So I left that in the code intentionally. We are using the Gremlin client. This is from gremlin.net. We are specifying graphs_on_2 reader and graphs_on_2 writer, plus Gremlin client, the MIME type. Now, if you're one of those who wants to venture in and try those other versions, just understand that graphs_on_2 MIME type goes away in versions 3.5 and 3.6, but it's a string and you can look at the code documentation to actually pass in the string. So what I'm doing in here is we're then submitting the queries. When we submit the queries, what we're going to end up calling is the submit async. And then once we submit async, we have a result. I'm going to jump into that so you can see what's going on with the code. So with the code, you can see we have the submit parameterized query. We call submit async. That's what we're returning. If there's an issue, we're going to show the status attributes. We also do the status attributes as part of our option here when we get the results. The reason why I do the attributes here is so that you can see the costs. But I do have the option that you could toggle that off. So if you just want to see what happens when you run the query and get the results and you don't want to see the status attributes, you can go ahead and change the call in the .NET MAUI app. There's a Boolean value you can set to false to hide that. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to the MAUI app. Okay, so as I mentioned with the graphs, it's left to right. We want to show get you. I'm going to show get your edges. So these are getting the relationships that are tied to you. When I do my execute query, you can see I get one result. Now, edges, if you're running this in the Azure Data Explorer in the portal, what's going to happen is you'll just get the JSON result. If you're querying vertices, you'll get a chance at getting the graph result as well. The graph result again, is what looks like this one down below. So there's some kind of rendering there. Okay, I'm going to toggle that. So getting the edges that are coming out from you, this is what is result. You're going to see in there, there's ins and outs. Ins are the arrows pointing at it. Outs are the arrows coming out of it. Suppose I want to get all of the data talks. So I can say, well, I know that there's a node that's labeled topic, and I want to get all the talks that are coming out of there. So specifically, though, I'm going to filter that down with has. Find it with the name that has the value of data. So then the out E is going to be on that data node, and then the NV. And you'll see that we get a lot of JSON back. Again, mapping JSON to types there's plenty of documentation out there on how to do that. But I wanted to show you when you're querying with Gremlin.net, what is the result that's coming back? The next thing you could do is if you want to deal with the results just with string values, you can. So I could say, just give me the data talk names. You might like this talk, but you might also like other talks and data. And those are, and I wanted to execute query. So the other talks that you see here, so there's that leveling up data. So going from EF6 to EF7 that they just showed, there's my talk. And coming up next is event sourcing with Martin and PostgreSQL. And if you're watching this after a recording, these are other talks you may be interested in with data as well. So how did we navigate it? We went G.V to give me the collection of all the vertices. We need to filter it down to the topic that is labeled, or that it's got the name. We want all of the arrows coming out of that. And then we want to go to the vertices that are where those arrows are pointing. And then we want their name. You'll notice here, the status attributes, some of the things coming back. Status code, think of it like your HTTP status code. It's usually a good thing. If you see something like 429, then you have to retry. And there's retry logic, things like that. You can see the total server time. You can see the total request charge. So as you're running queries, you can then see how expensive each of the queries are. You can get from you. Let's go all the way to the data talks and take their paths. We'll execute that query. And now this is going to show you all the steps that it takes to get there. This renders a little bit better when you're working in the portal, because then you can see those steps. Now, there's something I do have to point out related to Gremlin that is not shown as part of the Gremlin.net. And that's a thing that Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin has in their Gremlin syntax called execution profile. So you can run any of these queries in Azure Data Explorer with the final step of that execution profile to see all of the costs step by step along the way. Now, these dedupes, again, if you want to see like what kind of vertices do I have a person, I have events, I have topics and talks. And what kind of relationships are we looking at? Are you interested in things, covers, contains? These are the way you can query and get a good understanding of what have you just inherited if you've gotten yourself into a graph database with Gremlin. There's one more I want to show with navigating. So we've talked about ins and outs. We want to talk about both. Before I run this query, I'm going to toggle the graph to show you where we're at. So we're going to start by getting this data vertex, and then we want to get all of the relationships. So all of these arrows. Well, how do we do that? Do we stack ins and outs? Nope, there's one more keyword to know about when navigating the relationships and vertices, and that's the both keyword. And so we have a both example and has name and both E. So we're going to start at the collection of vertices, filter it down that has a topic, specifically the one that has the name data, and get me all of its edges, so ins and outs. When I execute that query, we should see there should be about 5 IDs. So when I'm looking at JSON, I'm looking specifically in this case for the IDs to see how many results I'm working with. 1, 2, 3, 4, and one more, 5. How do I know one more? Because it stops after that. So this is a quick walkthrough in how do you demo going from you to other talks that you may be interested in besides this one. Well, we include this one, but so you can follow these arrows and navigate going through gremlin.net. Again, this particular demo, this Maui demo, is showing the query with the Gremlin syntax. And then if you look at the code in the class library, that is the gremlin.net syntax. For you, when you clone the repo, you can also load the talks. You can load them in the different steps, and you can clear the data. Be warned, when you click clear data, there is an execute query. When you drop the data in Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin, you only need to drop the vertices because the edges are stored with the vertices. The edges are specifically stored as out edges with the vertices. So be aware of that as well. And I will go ahead and run that so you can see this is an expensive query. We're talking about thousands instead of, yeah, see, here we go. Request charge. A little more expensive. And then just to show you that there are no more vertices, I can go ahead and execute it. So go ahead and give this demo a try. What you'll need again is to create an Azure Cosmos DB for Apache Gremlin account. You can use the free tier. That is exactly what I use here for my demos. I try to use demos that everybody else who sees this at home can also work with it. Again, I'm using Visual Studio Community Edition, so you'll be able to work with that, and .NET 7 as well. Are there any questions?
No questions at all. Just a lot about not feeding gremlins past midnight.
No, you don't want to feed the gremlins past midnight. So there are additional resources for Gremlin. I didn't want to get too, that's a user group and conference presentation that goes on for an hour to hour and a half very easily. And I know we are limited on time here, so I wanted to be aware of that. But there are also resources for you to take a look at. So we've got Cosmos DB has wonderful cheat sheets. They're available in regular form and letter form, and I think the other side is legal form. But they have cheat sheets for their 4 APIs for Core, for MongoDB, for Apache Gremlin, for Cassandra. Then there is also the graph support and compatibility. You need to check that because if you run a Gremlin query and you're like, well, why doesn't this work? It's not 100% compatibility with the Apache Gremlin Tinkerpot project. There is a bulk executor library. The link that I have in here is for the .NET examples. They have, I believe it's .NET and Java that they both support for bulk executor for loading both Gremlin and then also Core API. The practical Gremlin is a great tutorial if you want to go soup to nuts, A to Z, beginner to let's jump into this. Calvin Lawrence's tutorial, I love recommending that because it's a great gradual into it. And then Daniel Cuppets has another great Gremlin cheat sheet as well. So if you find yourself working with Gremlin and the Gremlin syntax, that's that. And then if you want to reach me after this talk, feel free to scan the QR code that will take you to my GitHub page. That's where I have all my links to my LinkedIn, my Twitter, wherever you want to find me today. That's the best place to start. Or you can also email me at sarah@cleatechconsulting.com.
This is perfect. You know, I found a new toy back here. So I feel like Marty McFly Jr. wearing these sweet, sweet goggles. But no, Sarah, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about, particularly the graph database aspect of Cosmos, right? And how you can go through and querying, because it's kind of shows just like any other database that we're discussing before with Postgres and SQLite. There's different features that each database supports, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's cool from my perspective to be able to say, hey, let's take a different approach on this queries. And obviously they have impacts on performance and so forth, but It's great. Thank you so much for taking what we typically know and just turn it on its side and presenting something different.
I say next time you need to look at relationships of the data within the data itself, consider graph databases.
That's right. Yep. That is, but again, it's one of those situations that you need it rather than like, let's start there.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Perfect. Well, I see that I have our dear friend Jeremy Miller in the back in the green room. So give me 1 second over here. And of course, I'm wearing this thing and Face ID doesn't work because it can't recognize my face as expected. So I'm going to bring Jeremy on. So again, Sarah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.